motivated by trying to understand better how an NGO can work with social movements, and this is based on our stated commitment to prioritizing partnerships with movements in South Africa. And this is based on our understanding that the only viable strategy to achieve a long-term radical change is by having people who are directly affected by the issues lead that movement for change.
And we have, through the course of our work, supported social movements, particularly the movements that support mining-affected communities. And so we have worked with Mining Affected Communities United in Action, which is Makua, and we've supported them over the last couple of years, and that process has gone very well. The movement itself has grown significantly, and we found that we now needed to start to reflect on what is it that we are doing, how do we support the social movement, and what is it that we need to do, because we're also very aware that there is a power dynamic that comes with that kind of support, especially from an NGO, and we must be very aware of the power dynamic.
And based on our own experience of movements and NGOs, we know that the South African landscape is littered with disastrous relationships, partnerships between these two entities, and regardless of good intention. So everybody is guided by good intention, but we haven't quite figured out how to do it properly.
So what we've decided to do is to bring together a broad spectrum of social movements in South Africa, academics and NGOs who are active in social movements, to ask some of the very critical questions about our relationship with social movements, and how we can ensure that NGOs don't play a negative role in this process, and that the power of communities are located with communities. So there are a number of questions that we hope to ask during the course of this discussion.
Forward to radical social movements, forward! Forward to radical social movements, forward!
So we are, as an organization, committed to support, to engage, to create space, to convene, but more important, to respect the protagonism. We do know that the agents of change who sits on the driver's seat of change is people on their own organizations, and our job is to support, our job is to make ourselves available, but respect and understanding the different roles.
The first thing I think we should say is that we are making an unnecessary, often, polarization between an NGO and a social movement, because I don't think there are only these two forms of organization. If you look in any community, what is between an NGO that exists there and a social movement is varied, from a street committee to a church, men's club, to a women's savings club, to a kitchen garden, whatever. All these things exist in our communities. And these things play one or other role. And today, they may not be overtly political, but they form the basis in our communities of self-organization, civic activism of one form or the other. I think we need to revisit this fact that these groups still exist in our community, and they're largely ignored.
The lesson particularly of working with different movements and organizations is that local organizing and mobilizing is critical. No national or regional movement can be sustained without local organizations and local structures, strong local organizations and structures. And very specifically, as a woman, I think it's critical to say my reflections come that most of the organizations, the movements are male-dominated in terms of structure, in terms of culture, in terms of hierarchy. And this is something in particular that I would like to see change. Also, in terms of our political content in the movements, We discuss issues of class and race, and engage, and of course gender. And of course, in working with the rural women's movement, what I found is often women's organizations' movements are not recognized as a movement. It's not an authentic movement because it doesn't look like a movement. In our view, it is not a big national structure that has profile, so immediately it's not a movement. But we have to ask ourselves, what is it that defines a movement for us?
Then I also want to agree with Michelle that patriarchy is still very rife within the movement, within our organizations, whether at local level, whether at national level. Patriarchy is still there. And that patriarchy, the sexism that happens, the abuse of women that happens amongst us, it's something that people don't talk about, and this is something that needs urgent address, because if we don't address that, we're not going to get anywhere. And also the issue of class and race. People, we work in non-governmental organizations, but there are people or non-governmental organizations that just take the phone or write an email, invite people from different parts of the country, and they've never ever set their foot there. They don't know the material conditions that people live under, they don't know the struggles that they have, but only what they're interested in is to rent a crowd, or also, without renting a crowd, recycle comrades to go to each and every meeting and rent them as toy robots. Thanks.
Thank you. Always bear in mind that people are not only fighting for ideas, for things in anyone's head. They are fighting to win material benefits, to live better in peace, to see their lives go forward, to guarantee the future of their children. That's why the local struggles will always be central. Housing will always be central. Food will always be central, and other important things. I'm not saying neoliberalism is not important. We must know, Comrade Misha is right. But that cannot be imposed, that comrades do not understand. I'm not saying climate change is not important, but that must be in the context of the struggles that people are waging on the ground.
I'm saying this at a time when, as you all know, NUMSA has been expelled from COSATU on Friday, and the whole shape and tenor of politics in South Africa has changed. And for some of us, not just that moment, but the moment stretching all the way back to Marikana and before, is a period in which we're declaring the death of the old movement. Some of us who were part of the anti-apartheid movement are now saying that that whole anti-apartheid movement is dead. It's so morally compromised, it's so integrated into the imposition of this neoliberal order that it serves no purpose for social justice anymore. But instead of this occurring in a period of defeat of the popular movements, we're seeing a resurgence of new movements. So it's the death of the old, but the emergence of the new. That's important that for us, that we capture this as not something to be sad about, but that we are, what is emerging in this country now is a new movement that promises everything if we are prepared to be committed to what is emerging from this movement.
I agree with you, we start at the local base. That's our core and our core foundation. And when it comes to the issue of NGOs, organizations, CBOs, I do agree with you, but the fact remains that we become copycats. And the second issue is that we lose focus. Our focus of the struggle changes because of the donors, or the criteria that the donors say. If you need 1 million because your program says you are fighting for the injustice that are there at the local base, we say you diverge, you talk of human rights, what have you, and then we'll give you 3 million.
One is the transparency in the NGOs. You'll have a program in Botshabelo where an NGO will come in and that NGO will tell the poor people who are unemployed to bring a cabbage and pap, whereas they have applied for resources to have that particular workshop. So the transparency in terms of accounting. So it's just unfortunate that most of them are not here. Number two is the co-option of activists, because you will realize that they will co-opt Ayanda, and Ayanda tend to be a monster against their own activists. So also that is a problem. The third one is that our struggles are not being supported. You are supporting the struggles of your funders. Because when you have a program on the ground and say this is the program that we want to implement of our own struggle, you'll be saying, no, we can't support that one. We are supporting this one because our funders need us to support this one. So there's no transparency there. There's no engagement of the activities on the ground.
If you are saying that you are a locally based organization, your own organization, with your own leadership, with your own issues and your own plan of action, you must defend your right to be your own person, to defend your struggle and to say to people, this is who we are. We're a movement for water, or we're a women's movement, or we're a mining activist, and defend it and to say to people, if you want to work with us, support these issues with us, accompany us or do whatever it is with us on these issues, and not to change your issues, because if you do that, then you've lost the first battle, you've lost your own political integrity.
Just finally about NGOs, my view is that when I work with many NGOs, is that NGOs, us and NGOs must work ourselves out of jobs. When movements are strong, to wage their own struggles and they no longer need support of NGOs, we can find something else to do.
I find it a little bit disappointing that comrades are still speaking the language of the old movement. In other words, the power has already begun to shift to the movement, some of whom are present in the room. And to recognize that means that comrades need to move beyond the idea of saying things like, the donors must come and see what's happening in our community so they can fund that. Because then you're putting power back into the hands of donors and NGOs, and we're actually going backwards instead of forward. So the point is, for movements to be stronger and to realize their power, then they need to establish control over these other institutions, not be at their mercy.
What is happening there is a relationship of power that's going wrong. And we are not equally, but both responsible for changing that relationship. And I think that's the challenge we should make ourselves. How we change that relationship between two different institutions, movements, and political possibilities in a way that we can challenge together a much bigger enemy, which is the enemy that's creating that level of oppression that's unique in the world. We never had so much oppression. And sometimes we get so much time talking about how do I like fight or not, or what we do different or not, and we forget about our bigger enemy. And I think that's the great opportunity here, is to create a new pact, political pact, on how we relate to each other to tackle a much, much more difficult and deeper agenda. Thank you.
We're still struggling as women in the land issues. When you go to communities like Limpopo trying to find your land, or fight for the land, it will be like, where's your uncle, where's your brothers to claim for that land? Because you're a woman, you're not given an opportunity to claim for that land. If your husband is dead, the brothers or his uncles are there to inherit what he left for you and your children. But because you're a woman, you don't have the right to fight for those things. So Wamua is where it gets in, to help those women who are suffering from issues like that one. And the other part would be the gender violence that we are facing in our communities. Wamua is there as a movement to promote those programs in our communities. But the NGOs are using us as program. When I say as program, it's like You come to us saying that we have the women structure, since we're that you are a woman from this organization and this organization, can you come up with the agenda things and then compile a report for us and then try to do this thing, and then you give us the report and then we give you that thing. You collect us from all over Free State, all over South Africa, meet with you here, and then but you're not capitalizing us, you're not giving us the self-development, you're not giving us that confidence that we can do things on our own. So as Moa we're saying, we want independence. We want to be an independent movement. We want to have our own programs. As the bigger NGOs come to us to support the programs that we have as women, not to come with your own programs and tell us to do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Remember what we said when we formed Makua was that we were tired of NGOs using communities as research subjects. So we ought, as building forward, not to actually repeat the same mistakes. We ought not to transform Makua into another organization that is going to compete with community organizations. Remember, we are organized, and in fact Makua is formed by community-based organizations. We want to see a movement that will actually begin to challenge and contest for spaces with community-based organizations, because Makua itself can transform into an NGO and become very much bureaucratic, dictating and dragging community organizations. So we have that challenge to say, in addressing these issues, the issues of patriarchy and so forth, we must really begin to focus our efforts and energies, resources, whilst at the same time we roll back dependency. Thank you.
There's often criticism of protests because they become violent. They become violent. Now in our research, it was clear in every community where a protest became violent, that firstly people had been protesting for 3 or 4 years without success. And secondly, that violence itself was a way of people getting a voice. As people said, when they set fire to buildings, they said, the Premier will see by the smoke that we're calling him. So the question, comrades, do we have to use violence? Can we find different ways to build organizations? These are some of the challenges that are facing us that come from my academic research.
My own position is that this is a moment of opportunity. It's a moment of terrible danger, but also opportunity, because it could signal the movement to a new kind of socialism, a kind of democratic, ethical, and ecological socialism that would involve food sovereignty, that would involve energy democracy, that would involve social ownership of productive resources, that would involve public transport, that would involve new ways of relating to nature and to each other, and that are focused on building collective empowerment rather than individual advancement. The missing piece that I'm trying to point to is the vision that we need to share about where we are going and why we want to go there. Because if we don't know this, we cannot unite our progressive forces in the way I think everyone in this room would want to see.
So first of all, I think it's not a coincidence that the values that drive patriarchy is exactly the same values that drive capitalism. No? It's individualism, it's greed, it's violence, it's militarism, and that we often proceed in our movements to not make the links between the two. And if you look at South Africa today, and it goes back to the issue of political education, which has been raised on the platform a number of times, in a post-apartheid era when we invested nothing in cultivating an alternative set of values. So the prevailing values in South Africa today are market values. It's the values of looking out for yourself, of trying to get as rich as possible, to step on anyone to get there. And I think Michelle mentioned this, the question of racism. We arrived in 1994, we woke up one morning and declared ourselves a rainbow nation without engaging with the question of race at all.
We
were not given the right platform as Wamua to discuss our issues and challenges that we are facing as women from mining communities. And second thing, we want to be treated with respect within the community. And we want our input to be valued and to be put into consideration.
First point is about patriarchy caused by chiefs who sign deals with the government without consulting us in rural areas. Secondly, is about capitalism, because big companies are taking decisions, but the government is giving them opportunity so that when they take those decisions, they forget about we people directly affected by those companies.
I'm talking about Abobaba, Abasbona as objects that are useless. The only word that is important is the word that comes from a man. So now why I'm saying this is, as Abu Mama, we should be strong. This is not we are in a university, we must train ourselves, we are in an army. Yes, it's not gonna be easy. And another thing that I think it's killing our organization where we come from, it's money. Money is a big issue. Siyakhosana, we do whatever. Comrades, you cannot go door to door on an empty stomach.
So my challenge to the men is the women in this room are afraid that they will be targeted, they will be cut off. And the challenge to you is not to do that because you're weakening your own organizations. In South Africa, women constitute 52% of the population. If you're not taking women's issues seriously, you're not talking for the majority of people in your community. If we look at mining communities, if you go there, the majority of people in those communities are women and children. So if you're only talking men, if you're only representing men's interests, you're actually an irrelevant organization.
The idea that some of us are good at marching and others are good at thinking. And in the past, popular organizations have perpetuated that by saying footseek intellectuals, away with intellectualism. We've allowed some people to become the champions of the thinking, while we are the champions of the translating or the marching. We have to overcome that and make sure that within the broader movement, where there are intellectual resources at the universities, in the NGOs, they don't remain there, but they flow into and through the movement.
As an organization, without resources, it becomes a very difficult thing to do. As community-based organization, we are faced with when we go to protest, march, and all those things, police tend to change the political issue to a criminal issue. And we are faced with comrades that are in jail, and we are faced with the problem of having to give them bail and all that stuff. It's another very serious problem.
The fabric of the social movement is when people will feel at home. If people feel at home in the social movement, it means that the power relations in the social movements are not negative to the members in that social movement. And so leadership, if we say we need to build women's leadership or we need to build leadership in social movement, it doesn't just mean the leaders from the front. We need to become active listeners to realize that there are a lot of leaders leading from the back. And we need to acknowledge them as leaders and not to see those who scream Amandla from the front as the leaders.
Look, I think it's the wrong question you're asking, as in the agenda. What is the future of social movement in South Africa? And what role should NGOs play in their formation and support? I think that's an unhelpful question. I don't think it opens avenues to the kind of thought we need to really be grappling with. I've reformulated the question as follows. What should be the strategy and tasks of regenerating, sustained, mass participatory organizing for people's power? I think once we move the frame along those lines of the question I've reposed, then we can go beyond the dichotomy that we have been caught in for most of the day. I hope that's the useful first contribution. I will not answer all aspects of the question I'm posing, because I think ultimately it is the concrete arena of struggle where these questions are answered. The first contribution to answer this question from my part is to say, yes, water, electricity, housing, unemployment, and so on are important. But if we just fight about those things, not understanding their systemic foundations, their structural roots, then we're not getting anywhere whatsoever. Because ultimately, what we end up doing is to seek concessions from what is becoming a neoliberal capitalist state, and will behave with those concessions. And the crisis will continue without us actually ever rising to the challenge of the systemic and structural foundations of the problems we face.
When you organize people, you have to make calls and mobilize people. And they don't even give us the money for mobilizing. You have to use your money. And when you count the money that you use for the only airtime for that particular mobilizing, you spend up to 300 rands. Now these monies are not paid. We don't have money. We have to dig in our pockets, which we must have the money that we don't have. So I think that it has to change really, and come up with something that, because we are supporting you, and you are having all these pictures with nice masses of people there, and these are your reports. That is why we are getting the funds, because when the funders see that, they see that we are working. But please support us.
The fundamental is the quality of the relationship, the political quality of that relationship, which demands a complete change on the way NGOs relate with social movements, with other allies, with academia, and with the political society as well. It's not only about as if the change lives only between social movements as the fundamental agent and NGOs as support. Society is more complex than that. Change comes from various places. So what I think is being important to express, and maybe that's why ActionAID is engaging in this kind of dialogue in many places, is that we do want to challenge ourselves to change that relationship and to negotiate politically a different level of relationship, which requires, number one, an understanding on what we agree, but also understand what we don't agree. And that's fine. I think we both have different legitimacies from different sources to disagree, and understand the areas of disagreement, but more importantly, understand where we agree, where we want to go together, and how we strategize together, and what role different parts play. So therefore, moving from the ATM relationship, through which you give us project, we give you money, you give us report, and none of us are accountable to anyone in terms of implementing a joint strategy, towards a understanding of a joint strategy, where different rules will be played, and resources should be subsumed to that political strategy. And I think moving the relationship to that level of a political negotiation, of a strategy for transformation, requires change from everybody. And that's not only NGOs. Requires change from movements as well.
We also need to kind of understand how we bring NGOs into the service of social movements, and that relationship starts to change. Granted that it mustn't be the central point of our engagement, because it isn't the main contradiction, but we need to find ways that the autonomy of the poor and the oppressed is developed in that process, right? So that we build organizations to learn from Mazibuko, and then we produce knowledge in the process, which is used to develop the power of the poor and the oppressed. So these things are quite critical. And it's important that as NGOs, we take it from ourselves, that we need to be aware that there is a different dynamic that can develop. We can work with social movements, and we cannot develop those key areas of autonomy and organization and knowledge production. And we can leave those things behind. And what we leave behind is a poorer space. So we need to be able to leave behind a richer space in which people can claim their power.
the roundtable raised even more questions than what we had, which is not a bad thing, but there was definitely, what I found powerful about the experience was the space that was created for movements to speak very directly to us and other NGOs. And I don't think there's enough of that in the room in South Africa.
One of the key problems is that NGOs normally support social movements with resources, with funds. And when that relationship establishes itself, it could very easily deteriorate into a patronage relationship where the NGO presents its own agenda, and through this funding process, it then determines the agenda of poor people.
So I think there must be a consciousness, which was part of what the roundtable was doing, was making explicit the fact that there is a power dynamic between movements and NGOs, and to say that we're both committed to a very constructive partnership. We share a vision of a very different kind of world from the world that we're living in now. And that when we encounter each other in partnership, we should be identifying and flagging the areas where we think we are living out the stereotypes. I don't think there's a way around that, because there's no NGO or donor in the world who's going to say, as a stated commitment, they want to oppress movements or puppeteer them or exploit them for their own reasons. But that is the experience of movements. And the NGO experience of movements is this constant battering of NGO, the very high levels of suspicion. And we often are shocked. We can't understand where it comes from. But if that's the experience of movements, we can't ignore it. We have to make it explicit and then work around it. But I think it's a constant negotiation. One roundtable is not going to solve the matter for us.
Some of this reflection is about how do we ensure that even though NGOs sit with the bulk of the resources, both in terms of human resources and in terms of financial resources. So NGOs are located with all this professional people and this money, and so it's very easy for NGOs to kind of dominate that process. So we have to find ways that we can limit that, place the power in communities and in the social movement.
The challenge is going to be to get other donors to shift with us beyond the rhetoric. So as I said earlier, there is no donor on the record saying they don't think it's important to work with movements, but they're not necessarily willing to take the next step and change their systems, their ways of doing business to make that possible. So at ActionAID, we want to pioneer it. We know that the devil is in the detail. Yeah, we can all make the same political commitment, but where's the evidence of it in our partnerships? Who are we giving grants to in South Africa? What are the terms of those partnerships? And what are we doing to enable the growth of movements? So it has to be illustrated in the work that we are doing.
On the one hand, you have a social movement who doesn't want to become an NGO in the professional sense as we understand NGOs today. They want to focus on the issues that affect them, and they want to bring about change in their communities. But the dichotomy now is, the conundrum that we sit with is that they cannot access funds because they're not a registered organization. And so how do they access these funds if they're not registered? So now they have to go through a process of registration, which changes the nature of the organization tremendously. And it introduces other dynamics where power and control become more important than social change. And so that link, that gray area, almost like a cesspool, a deep dark hole which we can't bridge very often, is very problematic because it limits the ability of social movements to engage and do the things that they want to do, because we know that social movements require resources like any other organization, human resources, financial resources, and other capital resources like desks and phones and so forth. So they need these things, but the problem is, how do we help them, assist them to do that without professionalizing them to the point where they lose the essence of what they were as a social movement? So it's a very difficult question. I don't think there are easy answers, like I said, but we have to continuously question ourselves and ask the questions in order for us to make sure that as we go along, our new learnings can assist the process rather than kind of retard the process.
I don't think it's a short-term project. I don't think we got to where we are in 2014. Even in 20 years, I think it's a much longer trajectory we should be reflecting on. But I think the fact that the consciousness is shifting in civil society is an important starting point, and that it won't be linear, it won't just go in one way. But that if there's enough of us who share this vision, who's committed to it, we could make it happen, we could shift this country, we could shift this world.
Join